In today's gripping story, we'll learn about Jacob Colen, a man whose life was turned upside down at the most anticipated moment for his wife, the birth of their first child. What should have been the happiest day of their lives became an imminent tragedy when Jacob was faced with an impossible choice: save his wife or the baby about to be born. Before we dive into this story that will amaze you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can access real stories that will make you laugh, cry, and reflect. Linda wanted that evening to be unforgettable. While preparing dinner, she thought about how to share the news that would change their lives. The table was impeccable. Crystal glasses sparkled under the soft glow of the lamp, and a delicious aroma filled the air, wafting from a roast that had just come out of the oven. A bottle of wine was set aside, sealing the scene for a night that promised to be unforgettable. Jacob came home exhausted, the weight of a long, intense day at work etched on his face. As soon as he opened the door, he was greeted by something unusual. Linda hugged him tightly and gave him such a long, warm kiss that he was momentarily disoriented. It wasn't common to receive such an effusive greeting right at the door. He tried to say something, but before he could, Linda led him to the dining room, where the elegantly set table awaited. Jacob sat down, slightly suspicious as Linda began to speak enthusiastically, though he could sense there was more going on. She explained that she wanted to make this a special evening, something to mark an important moment. "Did I forget a date?" he asked, already apologizing, but Linda shook her head, smiling. She said the reason for the evening wasn't about the past but the future. He noticed her voice trembled slightly and her hands were restless. As Jacob opened the bottle of wine, Linda gently stopped him, holding his hand. "Wait a moment before serving. I can't drink. Not for a while." He paused, staring at her in confusion, until Linda took his hands and placed them over her belly. "We're pregnant," she announced, her voice thick with emotion as a shy smile spread across her face. Jacob felt a jolt run through his body. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. Then a giant smile lit up his expression. He hugged her tightly, repeating that he was the happiest man in the world. On the outside, Jacob seemed radiant, but inside, a whirlwind of emotions consumed him. While Linda spoke enthusiastically about plans for the future, he felt a wave of insecurity. It wasn't the moment he had expected to become a father. He loved his wife and wanted to see her happy, but inside, he was utterly terrified. He hid his anguish skillfully, keeping a smile as Linda shared her joy. While Linda shone with happiness, Jacob felt the weight of silent anguish. The news of the pregnancy had taken him completely by surprise. Outwardly, he maintained his smile, pretending to share Linda's euphoria, but inside he was grappling with a devastating conflict. Her happiness only deepened the knot in his stomach. Jacob was an ambitious man, dedicated to his career. At 27, he was rising in the marketing industry and believed his bright future depended on unwavering dedication to his work. He had well-defined plans: reach higher positions, build a solid financial foundation, and only then think about starting a family. A child at that moment felt like an unexpected obstacle in the path he had carefully laid out for himself. However, Jacob knew he couldn't share these thoughts with Linda. She was radiant, full of hope, making plans for the baby's future. Every time she mentioned how the next few months would unfold, he felt a wave of guilt for not being able to share the same joy. As Linda talked about nursery decorations and baby names, Jacob listened and agreed, but his mind was elsewhere, imagining how this new role as a father would change everything. He feared he wouldn't be good enough, that he wasn't ready for the responsibilities ahead. The memory of his own father, distant and cold, only reinforced his fears. That night, while Linda slept peacefully, Jacob remained awake, staring at the ceiling. Fear and doubt consumed him. He knew he needed to stand by her side, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing control of his own life. He had to decide. Would he let fear win, or would he find the strength to face what lay ahead? The weight of this decision shadowed him, suffocating him in silence. Jacob couldn't bear the weight of his emotions any longer. After a day where he could barely focus on work, he decided to seek out his best friend Hannah. She was someone he trusted completely, a constant presence in his life since college. If anyone could help him sort through his thoughts, it was her. Sitting at a corner table in a dimly lit bar, Jacob held his glass with both hands as if seeking stability. He began to speak, his voice hesitant at first, but soon the words flowed. "I don't know what to do, Hannah. I feel like a complete mess. I love Linda, I really do. But this news, it feels like I've lost control of my life." Hannah, her eyes full of understanding, didn't interrupt. She knew he needed to vent. Jacob continued, his voice now choked with emotion. "I've always been scared of being a father. My own father was absent, cold. He was never really there for me. What if I end up just like him? And there's more. I'm just starting to build my career. How am I going to support this? How am I going to handle everything?" Hannah placed her hand over his, offering a small measure of comfort in the chaos. "Jacob, no one is born ready to be a father. It's something you learn. The important thing is that you're already thinking about how to be better. That alone shows you won't be like your dad." Jacob shook his head, his eyes glistening with tears. "But what if I fail? What if I can't provide what my family needs?" Hannah took a deep breath before answering. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. What you need is to be present, to love your family, and to take it one step at a time. Linda is with you and you need to be with her too. This baby's going to change your life, Jacob, but it can be for the better. Sometimes what we fear the most is what we need the most." Hannah's words echoed in Jacob's heart. He knew his best friend was right, but the fear still lingered like an unwelcome visitor. Still, that night, a small spark of hope was ignited. Maybe he could learn. Maybe he could be the father and husband Linda and the baby needed. With that thought in mind, he went home feeling a little lighter, still uncertain, but willing to try. The appointment started like any other. The doctor asked routine questions while Linda answered with a smile, proud to feel the baby growing inside her. Jacob sat beside her, holding her hand, trying to push aside the thoughts that still tormented him about his readiness to be a father. Everything seemed normal until the doctor furrowed his brow while reviewing the results of a recent test. "We need to talk about some complications that have come up," the doctor said in a careful but serious tone. Jacob immediately felt his heart tighten. He leaned forward, fully attentive. The doctor continued, "The results show a high risk of preterm labor due to insufficient blood flow to the placenta. This could endanger both the baby and Linda, especially if there's severe bleeding during delivery." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Linda remained silent for a moment as Jacob tried to process what it all meant. "What does this mean in practical terms?" he asked, his voice slightly trembling. "If the labor is premature, or if complications arise during the process, difficult decisions might need to be made. In some cases, either the mother or the baby could be at risk, and we need to know how to proceed to save at least one life." On the way home, Linda was thoughtful, her gaze distant but resolute. When they parked, she abruptly broke the silence. "Jacob, I need you to promise me something." He turned to her, surprised. "What is it, Linda?" "Promise me that if it comes to that, you'll save the baby." Jacob's eyes widened, feeling an immediate weight fall on his shoulders. "Linda, why are you saying this? Nothing's going to happen. We'll get through this together." But Linda wasn't willing to back down. "We don't know what might happen, Jacob. And if a quick decision needs to be made, I want you to save the baby. He needs a chance to live." Jacob was in shock. He held her hands, trying to hold back the tears forming in his eyes. "I can't imagine life without you. How can you ask me to make that choice?" Linda looked at him firmly, though tears glistened in her eyes. "Because I would do it for him. It's my body, Jacob. I already love this baby more than anything. I couldn't live knowing you chose me and let our child die." Jacob lowered his head, utterly devastated. He knew Linda was certain of her choice, but it didn't make the situation any less unbearable. "I will protect both of you, always. Please don't ask me to choose." The words lingered in the air as Linda held his hand, determined. "You'll understand, Jacob. One day you'll understand." In that moment, Jacob realized that Linda's love for their baby was unshakable, but the thought of losing her was tearing him apart. The weight of the decision he might have to make shadowed him, even though he didn't know if fate would force him to face it. It was supposed to be a normal day. Linda was at home, organizing some things for the baby, when she began to feel sharp pains in her abdomen. At first, she thought it might be something common in pregnancy, but as the pain intensified, she realized something was wrong. With her heart racing, she called Jacob, who was at work. He answered, and hearing Linda's trembling voice explaining the situation, he dropped everything and rushed home. When he arrived, he found Linda sitting on the couch, holding her belly with her hands and breathing heavily. "We need to go to the hospital now," he said, helping her to her feet. On the way, as he drove quickly, Jacob tried to stay calm, but his mind was filled with scenarios he didn't want to imagine. At the hospital, Linda was immediately taken into an evaluation room. Jacob stayed outside, pacing back and forth, trying to control his anxiety. A few minutes later, a doctor came out and asked him to come in. With a serious expression, the doctor explained, "Linda is showing signs of preterm labor. As I had previously explained, there's an insufficiency in the blood flow to the placenta, and if we don't act quickly, both she and the baby could be at risk." Jacob felt the doctor's words like a blow. He looked at Linda, who was lying on the bed in pain, but tried to smile to reassure him. He held her hand, feeling powerless, but tried to convey strength. "You're in good hands, Linda. We'll get through this," the doctor continued. "We'll try to stabilize the situation so the baby can stay in the womb longer, but an emergency delivery might be necessary." The severity of the situation became even clearer when the doctor explained the risks. A premature birth could mean complications for the baby, while Linda's health was also hanging by a thread. Jacob felt the weight of the doctor's words. The possibility of losing Linda or the baby tormented him, and he could barely breathe. As the doctors prepared, Jacob stayed by Linda's side, holding her hand and trying to hold back tears. "I'm here, Linda. I'm not leaving your side." Linda looked at him with a firm gaze despite her pain. "Jacob, remember the promise." He nodded, but his heart was breaking. The room grew busier as the medical team prepared for what was to come. Jacob knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. All he could do was wait and pray that somehow his family would leave that room whole. Jacob had barely processed what was happening when the doctor appeared again, this time with a grimmer expression. "Mr. Colen, we need to talk immediately," he said, calling Jacob out of the room. Jacob felt his heart race and his legs nearly give out as he followed the doctor down the hallway. He knew something terrible was coming, but had no idea how devastating it would be. When they stopped, the doctor got straight to the point. "The situation is critical. Linda is experiencing severe hemorrhaging, and the baby needs to be delivered now to have any chance of survival. But there's a problem. We can't save them both. We need to know from you who we should prioritize." The words hit Jacob like a punch in the chest. He looked at the doctor, hoping he had misunderstood. "What do you mean you can't save them both? There has to be another solution?" His voice came out desperate, his hands trembling. The doctor shook his head, sadness evident on his face. "We've done everything we could to stabilize the situation, but time is against us. If we don't act now, we could lose them both. You have 5 minutes to decide." Jacob felt as if the ground was opening up beneath him. He fell to his knees in the hallway, his head in his hands. Linda's face and the words she had spoken months ago came to his mind, a cruel reminder of what he now had to face. "Promise me that if anything happens, you'll save the baby," she had said with such conviction. But how could he do that? How could he choose between the love of his life and the daughter he hadn't even met yet? He couldn't breathe, and he began hyperventilating. He tried to think, but his mind was a whirlwind. "Why is this happening to me?" he thought. "I love my wife. I can't live without her. But the baby? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I regret it for the rest of my life?" As he wrestled with his thoughts, a nurse approached and touched his shoulder. "Jacob, I know this decision feels impossible, but remember, sometimes love means thinking beyond ourselves. Ask yourself what Linda would want you to do." Her words pierced him like an arrow, bringing Linda's request back to the forefront of his mind. With tears streaming down his face and his hands still trembling, he looked at the doctor and with a weak but resolute voice said, "Save the baby." Jacob knew time was running out. The doctor's words echoed in his mind like a sentence. You need to decide now. Sitting on a chair in the hospital corridor, he felt the weight of the universe on his shoulders. His head spun, tears fell uncontrollably, and his hands trembled as if holding something invisible, but incredibly heavy. He looked at the door to the room where Linda was being prepared for surgery. I promised her, he murmured to himself, trying to summon the courage to accept what he had just done. He had chosen to save the baby, chosen to honor the wish of the woman he loved more than anything, even if it meant losing her. Linda will never forgive me if I don't do this, he thought, trying to justify his decision. But the idea of never seeing her again, of never hearing her laugh, felt like a knife twisting in his heart. He wondered, with a heavy chest, if he had made the right choice. Time dragged on cruelly as Jacob waited. He stared at the floor, his hands clasped as if they were his only anchor, and prayed. For the first time in a long time, he called out to God with all his being. Please don't take Linda away. Save my family. Do whatever it takes, but save them both. Each passing second felt like an eternity. He watched nurses coming and going, but none gave him any news. The silence was deafening. His anxiety grew with each moment, and he felt as if he couldn't breathe. The nurse's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Sometimes love means putting the wishes of the one we love above our own. Jacob didn't know if he could bear the weight. The weight of his choice consumed him. He had chosen to save his daughter, but in doing so, he might lose the woman who was the love of his life. He clung to the fragile hope that somehow both would be spared. Finally, the door to the operating room opened and the doctor stepped out. His face was serious. Mr. Colen, the baby is fine. She's in the neonatal ICU and has a good chance of recovery. Jacob felt a momentary relief, but the doctor wasn't finished. As for Linda, her condition is critical, but we're doing everything we can. The words hit him like a blow to the chest. He was grateful for his daughter, but the fear of losing Linda still consumed him. Now all he could do was wait and pray. Jacob could barely feel his legs as he followed the nurse down the hospital corridors. Each step felt endless, his heart pounding so loudly he thought it might echo through the halls. As they approached the neonatal intensive care unit, he took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself for what he was about to see. But how could anyone truly prepare for a moment like this? When he entered the room, the environment was quiet, except for the soft beeping of monitors. Jacob looked around, and his eyes locked onto a small incubator. That was her, his daughter. The nurse led him over, and for the first time, Jacob saw her. She was so tiny, so fragile, her pink skin covered with wires and tubes that helped her breathe. He stood still for a moment, staring at this little miracle who, despite all the odds, was there, fighting to live. His hand trembled as he reached to touch her through the opening in the incubator. When he felt the gentle warmth of her skin, something inside him shifted. It was a mixture of emotions he couldn't describe: joy and pain, hope and fear. Jacob felt tears streaming down his face as he whispered, "Hi, little one. I'm your dad." The words came out with difficulty, his voice choked with emotion. He wanted to smile, but the weight of uncertainty lingered. The happiness of seeing his daughter alive was tempered by the knowledge that Linda was still fighting for her life. As the nurse explained that the baby was stable but needed intensive care, Jacob listened attentively. Though his mind was divided, he thought of Linda. "She needs to meet you," he whispered to his daughter, still stroking her tiny hand. "She needs to get better. We need her." Jacob stayed there for what felt like an eternity. He watched every movement his daughter made, her tiny arms twitching, her eyes not yet able to open fully. It was a vision of strength and fragility all at once, and he knew he needed to be strong for her. As he returned to the corridor, Jacob offered a silent prayer. He thanked God for his daughter but begged for Linda. "Please, God, don't let me lose her. I need my whole family. Please." He knew the battle was far from over, but in that moment at least, he had found a glimmer of hope. Jacob sat in the hospital corridor, his head in his hands and his body exhausted. The past hours had been the longest and most painful of his life. He knew his daughter was stable, but the silence surrounding Linda's condition was tearing him apart. Every minute without news felt like an eternity, and he could barely contain his despair. Finally, the operating room doors opened. The doctor walked out with a serious expression, but there was something in his eyes that offered a shred of hope. Jacob, against all odds, Linda survived. The surgery was complicated, but we managed to stabilize her. She's in recovery. Jacob's heart raced and tears fell before he could say anything. It was a miracle. He thanked the doctor repeatedly before being guided to the room where Linda was. Each step felt lighter, though his heart was still heavy with concern. He knew Linda had faced an immense battle and needed to see her. When he entered the room, there she was, pale, her eyes closed but alive. The monitor by the bed emitted steady beeps, indicating her heart was strong. Jacob approached slowly, carefully holding her hand. He knelt beside the bed, resting his forehead on her hand. "You're here," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You made it." Suddenly, Linda opened her eyes slowly and whispered weakly, "Jacob." He immediately raised his head, his eyes filled with tears, and smiled. "I'm here, my love. I'm here." Linda tried to smile, even in her weakness, and with immense effort, she said, "Thank you for choosing the baby." Jacob gently squeezed her hand, trying to hold back his emotions. "I only did what you wanted, Linda. I could never disobey you." She took a deep breath, still tired but determined to express her feelings. "You made the right choice. Now we have a daughter, and we're here together." Jacob couldn't hold back his tears. He carefully embraced her, feeling the warmth of her body, and silently gave thanks for that moment. Despite everything, they were together. He knew the days ahead would be difficult, but that moment was all that mattered. Linda was alive, and the family he had feared losing was now the most precious thing in his life. Days after their daughter's birth and Linda's recovery, Jacob walked through the hospital corridors to visit his wife. As he passed a familiar area, his heart tightened, recognizing the place where he had made the most difficult decision of his life. It was there that he made the choice that changed everything, and in that moment, something caught his attention. The nurse who had supported him during that nightmare was a few feet away, organizing some papers. Jacob stopped, observing her for a moment, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. He approached with a shy smile and called out, "Excuse me, do you remember me?" She looked up surprised but soon smiled as she recognized him. "Of course I remember, Mr. Colonel. How are your wife and daughter?" Jacob shared that, against all expectations, Linda was recovering well, and their baby was a miracle, bravely fighting in the NICU. "I'll never forget what you said to me that day. Your words, they gave me strength I didn't know I had." The nurse smiled humbly, but Jacob noticed something different. Her expression seemed more tired, and there was a slight hesitation in her movements. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. She touched her belly almost unconsciously and replied with a faint smile, "I'm pregnant." Jacob's face lit up, but before he could say anything, she added, "But it's a bit complicated. I'm going to be a mom, but I have no one to share this with. I'm going through this on my own." Jacob felt the weight of her words. He didn't know the details but could feel the loneliness she carried. "You're not alone. You did so much for me and my family. Of course, we'll be here for you. My wife will want to meet you and, I'm sure, insist on helping." The nurse tried to hide her emotion, but her eyes glistened. "You don't have to do this, Jacob. I was just doing my job." "No, you did so much more than that. You gave me hope when I thought there was none. My family is here because of you. Let us give back." They talked a little longer, and Jacob insisted that she accept their help. Before they parted, he handed her his phone number, saying, "Please call me if you need anything. My family is here because of you, and I want to be there for you." As he walked away, the nurse touched her belly again, now with a smile of gratitude. At that moment, Jacob realized the bond between them was much more than a simple encounter. It was a reminder of the impact a kind gesture can have and how life connects people in the most unexpected moments. The days at the hospital were long, but also filled with small miracles that strengthened Jacob. He spent his mornings by Linda's side, helping her recover, and his afternoons in the NICU, watching his daughter fight bravely for her life. Each visit to the incubator filled his heart with love and renewed his determination to be the man and father his family deserved. That morning, Jacob held his daughter's tiny hand as a doctor explained that she was improving and would soon be able to go home. He felt a wave of relief and emotion. When he returned to Linda's room, he found her sitting on the bed smiling. "You can't stop looking at her, can you?" she teased in a voice still weak but full of affection. Jacob laughed, sitting beside her and holding her hand. "She's amazing, just like you." He took a deep breath and looked at Linda seriously. "I need to tell you something. I was so scared of not being good enough, of failing you and her. But now I know that what matters is being here, doing my best every day. And that's what I'm going to do. You're everything to me." Linda squeezed his hand tightly, moved, and replied, "You've always been the man I needed, Jacob. Now you just need to believe it." When they returned home with their daughter weeks later, Jacob felt that something inside him had changed forever. He no longer saw fatherhood as a burden or an interruption to his plans. On the contrary, it was his new mission, his purpose. He devoted himself to every little moment, the midnight feedings, the diaper changes, the nights when he simply sat by the crib, watching his daughter sleep. In the midst of it all, Jacob became an even more present husband. He helped Linda with everything he could, from household chores to being a shoulder to lean on when she needed rest. They laughed together, cried together, and above all, supported each other. One day as they walked through the park with Linda and their daughter, Jacob stopped and looked at them. His daughter was wrapped in a blanket in the stroller, and Linda, beside him, held his hand. He realized that all the fears he'd had before were so small compared to the joy he felt now. He smiled at Linda and said, "I never thought I could be this happy. Thank you for believing in me, even when I doubted myself." From that moment on, Jacob knew he was ready to face any challenge. He had learned that true strength came from love and dedication, and with his family by his side, he was prepared to build a future filled with hope, courage, and above all, unconditional love. As time passed, Jacob and Linda began to feel they needed a new chapter in their lives. The house they lived in was full of intense memories, some painful, others filled with triumph. But the couple wanted a place that symbolized the new phase they were living, something that represented the peace and hope they finally felt. After months of searching, they found a house in a quiet neighborhood with a sunny backyard and enough space to grow as a family. It was perfect. Jacob was moved as he imagined his daughter running freely on the grass and Linda creating new, happy memories there. "This place is our chance to start fresh, the way we always dreamed," Jacob said, holding Linda's hand as they walked through the empty yard. The move brought a breath of renewal. Jacob and Linda dedicated themselves to transforming the new house into a true home. They painted walls, decorated their daughter's room with cheerful colors, and hung pictures that told their story. Every detail was a reflection of the love that bound them and the gratitude for overcoming so many challenges. Years later, while enjoying their happy routine, came a surprise no one expected. Linda began feeling familiar symptoms, but hesitated to believe it. After a pregnancy test and a doctor's visit, the news was confirmed. She was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was healthy, without the complications they had faced before. When Jacob heard the news, he was speechless. He looked at Linda with a mix of joy and disbelief. "Really? We're having another baby?" Linda smiled, her eyes full of tears, and nodded. They hugged tightly, sharing that moment of pure happiness. Unlike the first pregnancy, marked by fear and uncertainty, this time everything felt peaceful. Jacob accompanied Linda to every appointment, holding her hand and sharing the excitement. Their daughter, now older, loved stroking her mother's belly and imagining what her little brother or sister would be like. The arrival of their second baby was a moment of pure celebration. Jacob felt that his family, already complete, was now overflowing with love. The new house, which once symbolized a fresh start, was now the setting for an even brighter future. Jacob realized that life, despite its unpredictability and challenges, always finds ways to surprise and reward those who face their struggles with faith and dedication. If you've made it this far, comment below. I read until the end. Share this story and help spread this emotion to more people. Just click share and let this impressive story reach more hearts.